the small blue-skinned girl sat alone in the cold, metal cage. Her eyes were large, wide, and filled with sadness, yet they had a spark of something more, something no one had bothered to notice. She looked up briefly as she heard the clatter of footsteps, but it was just another guard passing by, paying her no mind. The alien world she found herself on was nothing like the one she had known. Here, she was nothing more than a piece of trash, discarded and forgotten. She could still remember the days when she was once celebrated, before they turned on her. Now, she was nothing but a prisoner, locked in a cell with no hope, no future. A tray of food clattered down on the cold floor beside her. It was slop, nothing but leftovers, barely enough to feed a creature like her. She didn't move to eat at first. She stared at it, her thin body trembling from the cold, but her hunger was too strong. Slowly, she picked up the sandwich, taking a small bite. The food tasted like nothing. The sounds of laughter echoed from the other side of the room. The guards had gathered in the corner, watching her as if she were some kind of exhibit. They made jokes about her, calling her names, mocking her helplessness. One of them laughed louder than the others, slapping the table. "Look at that," he said with a sneer, "it's like feeding a stray dog." Pathetic. The word stung, but the girl didn't cry. She'd cried enough in the past. Now, she just stared at the ground, swallowing her food with quiet resignation. But then, something changed. The door to her cage slid open with a soft mechanical hiss, and she looked up. A figure stood there, blocking the bright light from outside, casting a shadow over her. It was a human. She wasn't sure what to expect. Humans were strange, different from the aliens who had captured her, but just as cold, just as distant. But this one, he was different. His expression wasn't filled with mockery like the others. It was something she hadn't seen in a long time, pity. But there was something else too. Something she couldn't quite place. He stepped inside, his boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. The guards glanced at him, surprised by his presence. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice weak and unsure. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched down in front of her, looking at her closely, his blue eyes softening as they met hers. He didn't say anything at first, he just stared. And for the first time, she felt seen. Without a word, he reached into his pack and pulled out something small, wrapped in a piece of cloth. He unfolded it carefully and placed it on the ground in front of her. It was a sandwich, similar to the one the guards had thrown at her earlier, but this one was different. It had been made with care, fresh, with a nice slice of cheese, and the bread wasn't hard. It smelled good, a reminder of a world far away from the one she was trapped in. She hesitated, unsure if it was a trick. But then the man smiled, gently, reassuringly, and nodded toward the food. "Go ahead," he said softly, "I'm not like them." The girl looked from the sandwich to his face. Her stomach growled loudly, betraying her. Slowly, she reached for it, taking a small, careful bite. The food tasted so much better than the slop they gave her. She chewed slowly, savoring every bite, feeling something stir within her. It had been so long since she had felt anything but hunger and pain. The man continued to watch her, his eyes warm but filled with a strange kind of sadness. He wasn't looking at her like she was some filthy creature. He wasn't judging her. He saw her for what she was, and that made all the difference. For a moment, the world outside the cage seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, her, the broken alien, and him, the stranger offering her something more than just food. He didn't say much, but his presence spoke louder than anything else. It was as if he was telling her, "I see you, and you matter." Finally, after she finished the sandwich, she looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" The man's smile faded a little, replaced by a look of deep thought. "I guess I see something in you that they don't. You're more than they think." She stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm nothing. I'm just trash." He shook his head, slowly standing up. "You're not trash. You're a survivor." His words echoed in her mind long after he left. She sat there, still unsure of what had just happened. The next day, he returned. And the day after that. Each time, he brought something small, food, supplies, but also something more. His attention. His kindness. It was nothing like what she'd been shown before. But why? Why did this human care when no one else did? The guards didn't like his visits, but he ignored their glares. He didn't care about their rules. He cared about her. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the girl started to wonder if there was hope for her after all. The door to her cage opened again. This time, it wasn't a guard. It was the human male. His expression was serious, more determined than ever. He looked at her, then glanced back at the hallway, ensuring no one was watching. "Come with me," he whispered urgently, his voice filled with urgency. She stood up, her heart racing. "Where are we going?" she asked, stepping toward him. But before he could answer, a loud alarm blared. The guards were coming. Naughty question for comments. What do you think will happen next? Will she trust him and escape, or will the guards stop them? Let us know in the comments. The girl's heart raced as the alarm blared louder. The human male grabbed her arm gently but firmly, his grip strong, guiding her toward the back of the cage. She hesitated, glancing back at the dark shadows of the guards who were now rushing toward the sound of the alarm. But there was no time to think. "Come on," he urged, his voice urgent, pulling her along. She stumbled slightly, her legs weak from being locked up for so long. She was used to the cold concrete, to the darkness, to the isolation. But this? This was different. The human's touch was warm. His eyes were full of determination. She felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was hope. They turned a corner, the sound of the guard's footsteps growing louder. She looked over her shoulder, the weight of her decision sinking in. She wasn't sure if she could trust him. But there was something in his eyes, something she hadn't seen in anyone else. A flicker of kindness, of compassion, and something more. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it. The man led her to a small side door. His fingers fumbled for a moment on the lock. Then, with a soft click, the door swung open. "Get inside," he whispered, his voice low. "They'll never know we were here." She glanced back once more, then stepped into the small, dark room. She could hear the muffled voices of the guards just beyond the door, but they couldn't see them. Not yet. The human male followed her inside and closed the door behind him, the sound of the alarm still ringing faintly in the distance. The girl pressed herself against the cold wall, still unsure of what was happening. She was free, at least for now, but the danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The human male leaned against the door, his breathing heavy from the rush. His eyes were locked on her, his face serious now. "I didn't think I'd get this far," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But now that we're here, there's no turning back." She stayed silent, her mind racing. Was this it? Was he really going to help her escape? She had lived through so much pain, so many broken promises. But somehow, he was different. He had already shown her more care than anyone else ever had. And there was something about him that made her want to believe in him. "Do you really think you can protect me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes met his, searching for answers. The man smiled softly, stepping closer to her. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Not while I'm here." She looked at him, unsure. He had no idea what she had been through, what she was capable of. She wasn't some helpless girl, but she didn't want to fight him. She wanted to believe in him. To believe that she wasn't alone anymore. "I'm not going to leave you," he added, reading her thoughts. "I promise." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, a comfort she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in so long, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Safety. But the sound of footsteps grew louder. The guards were getting closer. The girl's heart pounded as her body tensed. She could hear the murmur of voices, their footsteps coming closer. There was no more time to waste. She looked at the human male, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" His gaze didn't falter. He moved toward the small window on the far side of the room, glancing outside. "There's a way out," he said quickly. "But it won't be easy. We'll have to move fast." He turned back to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of resolve and something else, something almost daring. He reached out, brushing his hand gently against her cheek. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low and filled with promise. The girl stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. He was offering her more than just an escape. He was offering her a chance at a new life. A life where she didn't have to hide, where she wasn't treated like trash. He saw her for who she was, not what others made her out to be. She nodded, the faintest smile pulling at the corners of her lips. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Maybe even in years. The man's eyes gleamed with approval. "Good," he said. "Now, hold on tight. We're getting out of here." As he reached for the window latch, the door to the room suddenly creaked open, the harsh light from the hallway spilling into the small, dimly lit space. The girl froze, her heart skipping a beat. The guards were here. "Run," the man shouted. But before she could move, the sound of a voice stopped her in her tracks. "Where do you think you're going, little alien?" She turned, her breath catching in her throat. The guard stood in the doorway, his eyes dark and menacing. And behind him, 2 more guards appeared, their weapons raised. The human male stepped forward, his body shielding her from the guard's view. "You're not taking her," he growled, his voice low and full of anger. The guards laughed, but the tension in the room was thick. One of them raised his weapon, aiming directly at the man. "Step aside," the guard commanded. "Or we'll make you." The human male didn't budge. Naughty question for comments. What do you think will happen next? Will the human male fight for her, or will the guards take them both? Let us know in the comments. The human male stood in front of the girl, his back straight, his stance firm. His eyes locked onto the guards in the doorway, as if daring them to make a move. The room was filled with tension, every breath heavier than the last. The alien girl pressed herself against the cold wall, watching the situation unfold with wide, fearful eyes. Her heart raced, but something inside her felt alive. For the first time in her life, someone was standing up for her. The guard's eyes narrowed as he looked at the human male, sizing him up. "I said step aside," he repeated, his voice cold, filled with authority. The human male didn't flinch. Not a chance. There was a long, painful pause. The other 2 guards moved slightly, their weapons still pointed at the human, but they were hesitant. They'd been trained to deal with rebels, with fugitives, but this? This was different. He wasn't just any human. He was something more. Something that didn't back down. "You're making a mistake," one of the guards said, his voice shaky. The tension in the room had reached its peak, and no one seemed to know who would make the first move. The girl could see the fear in the guards' eyes. They were powerful, yes, but they didn't expect to face resistance from a human. Not like this. The human male slowly turned his head to look at her, giving her a quick nod. He didn't have to say anything. She could see it in his eyes, he was ready. She took a step back, her mind racing. She couldn't let him do this alone. She wasn't just some helpless prisoner anymore. She wasn't going to be that weak, scared alien girl anymore. Not if he was willing to risk everything for her. The human male shifted his weight, his hands ready, and he took a step toward the guards, a look of quiet fury in his eyes. "Last chance," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Step aside." The guards hesitated. They exchanged a look, and for a split second, doubt flashed across their faces. But then the leader of the guards let out a harsh laugh, tightening his grip on his weapon. "Get him," the guard leader shouted. In an instant, chaos erupted. The human male lunged forward, ducking under the first blast of energy that whizzed by his head. He was faster than the guards had anticipated. He used their hesitation to his advantage, grabbing the first guard's weapon and twisting it out of his hand with surprising strength. The alien girl froze, her mouth slightly open in shock. She had never seen anyone fight like this, especially not a human. It was like watching a predator at work, his every move precise and deadly. He wasn't just defending himself, he was protecting her. One of the guards attempted to take a shot, but the human male was already moving, diving behind the nearest pillar. The blast hit the wall with a loud crash, and the human male popped out from his cover, taking the guard by surprise. "Stay down," he shouted at the girl, but his voice was filled with urgency. "Get to the window. Go now." The girl didn't hesitate. She rushed toward the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how long he could hold them off, but she knew she had to move fast. The human male was still fighting, his movements fluid and sharp. He kicked one of the guards in the chest, sending him crashing into the wall. Then, with a quick motion, he grabbed a small, metallic object from his belt and tossed it into the air. It exploded in a burst of bright light, blinding the remaining two guards for a split second. "Go," he shouted again. The girl didn't look back. She scrambled through the window, her hand shaking as she gripped the ledge. She was free, but her thoughts were still with him. Was he going to make it out? Was he going to be okay? As she climbed down the side of the building, her mind raced. She had to believe he would follow. She had to believe that he could get out. Once she was safely on the ground, she ran, not caring where she was going, just away from the guards, away from the prison that had been her home for far too long. The night air was cool against her skin, and the stars above were a reminder of a world she hadn't seen in so long. The sound of footsteps reached her ears. She turned, expecting to see the human male behind her, but there was no sign of him. She kept running, her heart in her throat. Had he made it out? Or was he still fighting? As she rounded a corner, she heard the unmistakable sound of running footsteps, and she froze, her heart racing. "Wait," a voice shouted. She turned quickly, her eyes scanning the dark street. It was him. The human male. He had made it out. He was alive. He was breathing heavily, but he was smiling, relieved. "Told you I wouldn't let you down," he said with a wink, though his eyes were still serious. For the first time in days, the girl allowed herself to smile, a small, but meaningful smile. She had escaped. She wasn't alone anymore. But they weren't out of danger yet. They had to keep moving. A noise in the distance caught their attention. The sound of more guards, more footsteps. They weren't out of the woods yet. "Let's move," the human male said, grabbing her hand and pulling her along. "We have to keep going." But then, from the shadows, another figure stepped forward, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the city lights. It was another guard, and he wasn't alone. Naughty question for comments. Who do you think is going to win this time? Will the human male and the alien girl escape, or will the guards catch them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The dark street stretched out in front of them, an endless maze of alleyways and shadows. The human male's grip tightened around her hand as they ran, each step taking them further away from the prison they had just escaped. She could hear the distant sound of sirens, but there was no time to stop. They had to keep moving. The girl's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had never felt this alive, this free. Yet, in the back of her mind, there was still a nagging doubt. What if they were caught? What if he couldn't protect her? She glanced over at him. His face was set in determination, but there was a flicker of worry in his eyes too. He knew they weren't out of danger yet. And that thought made her grip his hand tighter. "We can't stop now," he said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "We need to get to the safe house before they find us." The girl nodded, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. She was too focused on the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls, too focused on the adrenaline surging through her body. She had never run like this before. She had never had someone fighting for her, willing to risk their life just to keep her safe. She stole a glance at him again. His dark eyes met hers for a split second, and for that brief moment, the world felt like it was standing still. The fear, the danger, it all faded into the background. It was just the two of them. But the moment passed quickly. He pulled her along, guiding her through the narrow alleyways as they moved faster. The girl struggled to keep up, but he never let go of her hand, his pace never slowing. She wasn't sure where they were going, but she trusted him. She had to. He was the only one who had ever shown her kindness, the only one who hadn't treated her like an animal. Suddenly, a loud shout broke through the silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of running footsteps. The guards! They were getting closer. She could feel the panic rising in her chest. They couldn't get caught. Not now. The human male's expression darkened. He turned a corner, pulling her behind him as they entered another alleyway. The streets ahead were empty, but she could hear the guards getting closer. They were running out of time. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice tense. She nodded, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She wanted to tell him she was scared, that she didn't know if she could keep going. But she didn't. She had to stay strong for him. For them. They reached a dead end at the end of the alley. The girl's heart skipped a beat. There was nowhere left to run. The human male looked at the wall in front of them, then glanced around quickly. There had to be a way out, some way to escape. He looked back at her, his eyes scanning the area. "We need to climb," he said suddenly, pointing to a ladder that led up to a rooftop above them. The ladder was old, worn, but it was the only way out. Without a word, the human male grabbed the ladder and began to climb, his hands moving quickly, his muscles straining with the effort. The girl hesitated for a moment, fear tightening in her chest. She wasn't used to climbing, to doing anything that took strength. But she had no choice. She had to follow him. With a deep breath, she grabbed the bottom rung and began to climb. Her hands were shaky at first, but as she moved up, she found herself growing more confident. She wasn't alone. He was right there with her. Halfway up, she glanced back. The guards were at the entrance to the alley now, their weapons raised. They saw her. They saw them. "Go," the human male shouted, his voice urgent. "Faster!" She pushed herself harder, her legs burning with the effort. She reached the top of the ladder just as a shot rang out, the sound deafening in the quiet night air. She scrambled onto the rooftop, her heart in her throat. She could hear the guards shouting, the frustration in their voices as they tried to reach the top of the ladder. But the human male was already on the roof, pulling her to her feet. "Run," he ordered, his voice low but filled with determination. "We have to keep moving." They ran across the rooftop, their footsteps echoing in the still night air. The girl's heart was racing, her legs shaking with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She didn't want to go back to the cage, back to being nothing. Not again. They reached the edge of the rooftop, and the human male turned to her, his face inches from hers. She could see the sweat on his brow, the exhaustion in his eyes, but also something else. Something softer. "We're almost there," he said, his voice reassuring but still tense. But just as he turned to lead the way, a sound from below caught their attention. More guards. They had found them. The human male's expression hardened as he turned toward the next building, his eyes scanning the distance. "We need to jump," he said. "It's the only way." The girl's eyes widened as she looked at the gap between the rooftops. It was wide, too wide. But there was no time to think. "Are you ready?" he asked, his hand reaching out to hers, his eyes locked onto hers with a promise. "Trust me." The girl swallowed, her mind racing. "I trust you," she whispered. And then, with a leap of faith, they both jumped. Naughty question for comments. What do you think will happen next? Will they make it to the other side, or will the jump be their downfall? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The world blurred around her as they leapt into the night, the wind whipping through her hair, her heart pounding in her chest. The gap between the rooftops seemed endless, and for a split second, she wondered if they'd make it. But the human male had already gripped her hand tightly, and she felt his strength pulling her toward safety. She landed with a thud, rolling onto the flat rooftop on the other side, her breath knocked out of her for a moment. She gasped for air, her mind still reeling from the jump. The human male landed beside her, a lot more gracefully, his hand steadying her as she scrambled to her feet. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low but filled with concern. His hands lingered on her arms for a moment longer than necessary, the closeness between them electric. She nodded, still breathing heavily, but there was a sense of awe in her eyes. She'd just made it across a gap that she thought was impossible. "Yeah. I'm good," she said, her voice shaky but stronger than before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting to feel like she could fight for her life. For their life. The human male smiled at her, but it was a fleeting smile, one filled with tension, knowing that the danger wasn't over. "We need to move," he urged. "We're not safe yet. They'll be looking for us, and we don't have much time." They kept moving, their footsteps muffled on the flat rooftops. The moonlight cast long shadows across the city, and the sound of distant sirens was a constant reminder that they weren't alone. The chase was far from over. As they crossed another rooftop, the girl couldn't help but glance at the human male again. He was still focused, still looking ahead, but there was something else in his eyes now. The bond between them was growing stronger. She could feel it. "I never thought I'd be doing something like this," she said, almost to herself. "Running, escaping. I've always been trapped." He looked at her then, his eyes softening just a bit. "I know," he said, his voice gentle. "But now you're free. You can make your own choices." For a moment, she let his words sink in. Free. The idea felt foreign, yet thrilling at the same time. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She wasn't anyone's toy or pet. She was herself. And she had the power to decide what came next. But the night wasn't done testing them. They reached another edge, the next rooftop even higher than the last, with a narrow alleyway below that led into an even darker part of the city. The sound of the guards chasing them was getting closer. The girl's heart was in her throat. The human male didn't hesitate. He pulled her toward the edge. "Hold on to me," he said, his voice steady but full of urgency. She glanced down at the narrow alley below. The fall would be rough, but they had no choice. They couldn't stay on the rooftops any longer. The guards would catch up eventually if they didn't make a move. Taking a deep breath, the girl nodded, her body tensing. She could feel the human male's hand on her back, steadying her as they both leapt together, landing hard in the alley below. The world spun for a moment as they hit the ground. The girl cried out softly as her legs buckled, but she quickly regained her balance. The human male's grip was firm, pulling her up, urging her to keep running. The alley was dark, but they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to stop. The distant sound of boots echoed in the streets behind them. The guards were getting closer. "We have to get to the safe house," the human male said, his voice urgent. He was practically dragging her now, the adrenaline surging through his veins. Just a little further. She didn't have time to think. She just kept moving, putting one foot in front of the other, focused on the sound of his voice, the warmth of his hand on hers, the safety that seemed just out of reach. They rounded another corner, and she could see the outline of a building ahead. The safe house. They were so close. She could feel her legs burning, her body screaming for rest, but she ignored it. They had to make it. The human male glanced over his shoulder briefly, spotting the shadow of the guards closing in. His expression hardened. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice low and filled with tension. "Don't stop." Just as they reached the door of the building, a loud crack sounded from behind them. The girl felt a sharp pain in her shoulder as something heavy struck her. She stumbled forward, almost falling, but the human male caught her. His eyes were wide with panic. "Don't slow down," he shouted, pushing her toward the door. "Go, now!" But before she could move, another guard appeared from the darkness, his weapon raised. The human male spun around, throwing himself in front of her. A blast of energy shot out, missing him by inches. "You're not getting away," the guard sneered, stepping forward. The human male's eyes darkened as he pulled her behind him, ready to fight. "You're gonna have to kill me first," he growled, his voice full of fury. With a sudden move, the human male lunged at the guard, tackling him to the ground. The girl stepped back, her breath shallow as she watched the fight unfold. Another guard appeared, but this time, the human male wasn't alone. The sound of another voice, familiar, echoed from behind them. "Is there a problem here?" The girl's heart skipped a beat. Naughty question for comments. What do you think happens next? Is help finally here, or is it too late? Let us know what you think in the comments. The girl's heart raced, her breath shallow as she watched the human male struggle against the guards. They were powerful, but he wasn't backing down. She could see the fire in his eyes, the resolve. He wouldn't let them take her. Not now. Not after everything. But as the guard beneath him struggled to get free, another figure appeared from the shadows, and the girl's breath caught in her throat. The voice was unmistakable. "Is there a problem here?" She turned, her eyes widening. A figure stepped out from the darkness, a familiar face. It was the same man who had helped her escape before. He wasn't a guard, wasn't a threat. He was someone from the underground. The resistance. "Who are you?" one of the guards barked, raising his weapon. But the man simply smiled, stepping closer, his hand on the hilt of a weapon that was strapped to his side. His calm demeanor was enough to send a chill down the girl's spine. She had never seen anyone handle danger with such ease. "I'm someone who's here to help," he said, his voice smooth, almost sarcastic. "You be wise to stop now." The guards hesitated, their eyes flicking to each other. They weren't sure how to deal with this unexpected interruption. But before they could react, the man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. He pressed a button, and a brilliant flash of light erupted from it. The guard stumbled back, momentarily blinded. "Go," the man shouted to the human male, who had been struggling to hold off the guards. With a grunt, the human male shoved one of the guards to the ground and grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her toward the safe house entrance. The girl looked over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of the man who had just saved them. He gave her a wink before turning back to the guards, already moving to take them down one by one. But there was no time to wait. The human male and the girl rushed into the safe house, the door slamming shut behind them. They stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on them. The human male glanced around the room, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "We're safe, for now." The girl nodded, still in shock. They had just narrowly escaped with their lives. She didn't know who that man was, or what he had been doing there, but she knew one thing for sure: he had just saved them. "You should rest," the human male continued, guiding her further into the safe house. "We're not out of danger yet. We need to lay low." She nodded again, her body shaking from the adrenaline and the constant fear. It had been one close call after another. She was exhausted, but she didn't want to stop. "Not yet." "Who was that?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "The man who helped us." The human male's face darkened slightly. "He's part of the resistance. I didn't expect them to be this close. We'll need their help if we're going to keep you safe. If we're going to stop them from hunting you down." The girl's mind was racing. The resistance? The idea of a group of people who were actually trying to help her, to fight for her freedom, was almost too much to process. She had spent so long believing that she was nothing, that no one cared. But now she was starting to believe that there was a way out. A way to truly be free. She looked at the human male, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "You've saved my life more times than I can count." He shook his head, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me. I'm doing this because I believe in you. You're more than they think. You always were." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt before. Hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to face this fight by herself. She had someone who cared. Before she could say anything else, a loud banging sound came from the door. The human male's head whipped around, his expression turning serious. "Stay here," he said, his voice low but commanding. The girl nodded, but her heart was pounding. She didn't want to stay behind. She wanted to fight too. She had to. They had been running for so long, and she wasn't going to hide forever. Not when she had a chance to stand up, to take control of her own destiny. The human male turned to face the door. "Get ready," he said, his eyes focused and sharp. "They found us." The door shook again, louder this time, as the banging continued. The girl could hear the faint murmur of voices on the other side, but she couldn't make out the words. It sounded like they were preparing for something. The human male stepped toward the door, his expression hardening. "I'll handle this. You just stay safe," he said, but she could see the worry in his eyes. But she wasn't going to stay behind. She wasn't going to cower anymore. The door suddenly crashed open, and the girl felt a surge of adrenaline flood her system. Naughty question for comments. What do you think will happen next? Will the human male fight his way through, or will they both be caught? Let us know in the comments. The door slammed open with a deafening crash, the hinges screeching in protest. The girl's heart skipped a beat as she saw the figures standing in the doorway. More guards. Their eyes gleamed with cold malice, weapons drawn, their expressions masked with the authority they thought they held over her. But now, she wasn't the helpless prisoner she once was. She wasn't the scared alien girl anymore. The human male stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. "You're not taking her," he growled, his voice low and filled with unrelenting fury. The guards hesitated for a split second, clearly surprised by his confidence, but that hesitation didn't last long. They raised their weapons, ready to fire, but the human male moved faster. He lunged at the first guard, knocking him off balance with a swift, powerful punch. The girl watched, heart pounding, as the human male disarmed the second guard in one smooth motion. There was no hesitation in his movements, only a fierce protectiveness that burned in his eyes. But the guards weren't going down without a fight. The third guard stepped forward, aiming his weapon directly at the human male. The girl's heart stopped. She couldn't let him die. Not like this. Without thinking, she reached for a nearby object, a broken piece of metal lying on the floor, and hurled it at the third guard. It struck him square in the face, knocking him back. He staggered, momentarily disoriented, and the human male used that moment to disarm him. "Stay down," the human male said, his voice hard as he kicked the guard's weapon out of reach. He didn't spare the other two guards a glance as they scrambled to get up. His focus was solely on the girl. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, but the tension was still there. The girl nodded, her breath still shallow. She couldn't believe it, she had just fought back. She had done something. She wasn't the fragile, weak alien anymore. She was strong. And that strength had come from him. The human male stepped toward her, his eyes scanning the room quickly. "We need to move. Now." They didn't wait for another attack. The human male grabbed her hand again, pulling her through the building. The safe house wasn't as safe as it had seemed. The guards had found them, and now they were on the run again. They ran down a series of narrow hallways, their footsteps muffled against the thick carpet. The girl could hear the sounds of more guards approaching, their boots echoing in the distance. They were closing in fast. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice frantic. We can't outrun them forever. The human male glanced over at her, a brief flash of concern crossing his face. But he was already thinking, already planning. There's a way out. A back door. Just a little further. They reached the end of the hallway, and the human male stopped in front of a door, his hand gripping the handle tightly. He glanced back at her. Stay close. I'll protect you. The girl didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, staying close to him as he opened the door. They rushed out into the alley behind the safe house, the cold night air hitting them like a slap. The street was empty, eerily quiet, but the sounds of the chase were still all too close. They didn't stop. They couldn't. As they turned a corner, the girl noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small hovercraft parked near the curb. It wasn't the kind of vehicle she had seen the guards use. It was sleek, low to the ground, and looked like it had been modified for quick escapes. We're not alone anymore, the human male said, almost to himself, as he turned to her. This is the way out. Come on. They climbed into the hovercraft, the human male taking the controls. The girl hesitated for a moment before she sat beside him, still trying to process everything that had happened. Where are we going? She asked, still in shock. Anywhere but here, he replied, his fingers working quickly over the controls. The engine hummed to life, and the hovercraft lifted off the ground, moving silently into the night sky. As they soared above the city, the girl looked out at the dark streets below. Everything she had known was gone. She had no home, no safety, no purpose, but for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. Not with him by her side. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with a raw emotion she hadn't expected. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. For everything. The human male glanced over at her, his lips curling into a small smile. I told you. I'm not going to leave you. They flew through the night, leaving the chaos behind them. But as the stars stretched out in front of them, the girl realized something. They weren't just running from something anymore. They were running toward something. Toward freedom. Toward the unknown. And for the first time, she felt a sense of hope. A real, true hope. But as they flew, the girl noticed something on the horizon, another ship, another presence. Someone was following them. And they were closing in. What is that? The girl asked, her voice trembling as she pointed toward the approaching ship. The human male's expression darkened as he looked toward the sky. We're not done yet, he muttered. Naughty question for comments. Who do you think is following them? Will they escape again, or is their freedom in jeopardy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.